Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading and eating. Our guest today is Noelle Martin. She is coming to us from Ontario in Canada. She is here to celebrate superfoods for super kids. Hey, Noelle, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I can't wait to dive into superfoods for super kids. Can you give us a little overview of this book?
Absolutely. So I wrote this book with kids in mind between the ages of 8 and 12, but really I have learned that toddlers love it too. And the idea is get kids into the kitchen, learning about food, learning about kitchen skills. So literally wrote it to the kids. So there's a little letter in there to parents, but in the recipe, kids will see that there's a little waving hand if they perhaps want to grab an adult to support them in any way. But it's to make food fun. You know, there's zippy zucchini chocolate chip cookies. There's out of this world oatmeal pancakes. It's a superhero theme. I have 3 boys who are obsessed with superheroes. And so it was really fun to get them involved even during the time that I was writing it. You know, guys, what do you think about this name? Or what would you call, you know, these muffins? And so there's a real feel there to help get kids excited.
Yeah. Well, I think cooking with your kids is such an important thing to do for families for so many different reasons. You know, one of them is just giving them the education that they need, teaching them about foods and about different ingredients and the benefits of these different foods and helping them make choices and empowering them with making choices. Can you expand a little bit more on just the benefits that kids can get from starting at a real young age, from being in the kitchen and helping to understand that they have the power to choose what they put inside their bodies, what they fuel their bodies with?
Absolutely. So kind of 3 main pieces to that. One, as you mentioned, I mean, it's just life skills, right? It's really great for kids to learn early on how to use a knife. Where does our food come from and how long it can sometimes take to make a meal? It increases that appreciation, right? So those life skills. Another big thing is we know that research has shown us time and time again that exposure matters. So when I work with parents of picky or selective eaters, I'll often remind them that we're thinking big picture. We're thinking long term. So if we have a child, say, making those zippy zucchini chocolate chip cookies, they're washing the zucchini. They're shredding the zucchini. They're touching it maybe as it goes into the bowl. So even if they don't eat the zucchini in those cookies until the 3rd or 4th time they've made it, eventually they may actually be not only interested in those cookies, but in the sauteed zucchini or in the meatballs that have zucchini in them. And so what we find is that increased exposure, it creates comfort, it creates interest. You know, I'm not a huge fan of oysters. I'm still learning to like oysters. But if you put an oyster on my plate 3-4 times a week, over and over and over again, I get to a place where I might be a little more curious to try an oyster again. And so we can't expect children to learn to like foods if they don't have that exposure there. We also know that the ownership piece is huge. So if they've helped to wash the spinach, they're more likely to eat the salad. If they've helped cut the peppers up, they're more likely to eat, you know, a few of those on their tacos or fajitas. So that ownership piece, and again, going back to that appreciation, you know, how long it takes to make something, that can make a huge impact for kids. So those are kind of the 3 main areas.
Boy, that exposure piece, it reminds me of a day not too long ago. It was right before the pandemic. We had a big family outing at a restaurant, and my niece was there, and I had something with shrimp, and she was looking at it, and she had never tried a shrimp before in her life. And I said, try it, pick it up. And it took her about 15 minutes to actually take the first bite. But she really liked it. And it was just this, wow, this is something new, a new discovery. So I absolutely appreciate that whole idea of exposing our kids. There's so many things that kids say that they don't like that they've never met before.
Absolutely. And also, children don't always articulate fully what's going on in their mind in terms of they'll just say, I don't like it. When in reality, maybe they look at a soup and they think, well, I tried a soup before and it was really hot and I didn't like that it burnt me. So I'm just going to say I don't like this because then I'm not pressured to have it. Mm-hmm. Or it could be there's a really big portion on their plate. And they think, well, if I have a bite, I might be pressured to have more. So smaller portions or helping kids know that, we as parents and caregivers, ideally, we decide what is offered, when it is offered, and where it is offered. And we give the child the opportunity to decide if they're going to eat it or not. But we also want to set them up for success, right? If we've made food available that has less nutrient density and then we don't understand why they're not eating their broccoli, perhaps they're just full, right? Mm-hmm. And then they'll say, oh, I don't like it. Mm-hmm. When in reality, they're thinking, I'm just full right now because I had a lot of whatever it was earlier. So we can do a lot to set our children up for success in terms of lots of exposure and also in terms of kind of balancing food throughout the day.
Yeah. So important. And one of the things, Noelle, you might think this is crazy, but one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to my kids and get them in the kitchen at very young ages and start talking to them about different ingredients and what do you want to put in here? Oh, and this is going to help you feel this way and that's going to help you feel that way. As I thought if I was talking to my kids about that when they were young, about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, that the conversations about the choices that they had to make around alcohol and tobacco and drugs were going to be much easier because we had laid the foundation of making healthy choices when they were kids.
Yes. You know what? I 100% agree with you. And also just the idea of talking, right? Mm-hmm. Talking about anything early on, like you said, it increases the chance of them talking to you about those really impactful conversations later on. We also know that the more children help with whether it be food prep or even unloading the dishwasher, vacuuming the floor, the more they help at younger ages and feel like they're invested and they matter and they're part of everything that goes on in the household, the more likely they are to continue that as adolescents as well and take those habits into adulthood. So everything that maybe takes a little more time and it's a little bit messier and it can't always be exactly the way that we would want it to be, but we are setting our children up for success for that later on. So I agree with you. The more that they understand that idea of health without pressure, mm-hmm. right? So, we don't want children to feel like, oh, you have to eat your broccoli to get a brownie. The brownie isn't the reward. The brownie's a food and the broccoli's a food. Mm-hmm. And all foods can fit. But the more that we're able to talk about how food can impact their body and brain, like you say, later on, it can help with those conversations of, and think about what alcohol or drugs might do to harm your body mm-hmm. or brain. Mm-hmm. I know my twins are 9 and they already have had some questions around things like that. And so I 100% agree with you that it does open up those conversations easier.
Speaking of the way food affects us, one of the things I noticed on your website is that you get into talking about supporting kids who may have attention issues through nutrition and tackling those issues from a nutritional approach before medications.
Yes. One of the things that we find is that, number one, sometimes ADHD is a misdiagnosis. Sometimes there's a nutrition deficiency there that we need to tackle first. But even within a proper diagnosis, quite often we're concerned about nutrition. One of the things is just that really high metabolism that comes along with a more active child. And we want to make sure that they have access to food on a regular basis and that it's food that can help stabilize blood sugar. So those long-acting carbohydrates with a source of protein, some healthy fats in there to keep them fuller longer, that really helps. We find that DHA, which is a form of omega-3. That's something that quite often a supplementation, and we even have some good research around that supplementation of a sufficient amount of DHA can actually be as effective as some medications. And that's huge, right? Because there's not a side effect of DHA. Mm-hmm. It's all good, whereas we can see some pretty negative side effects with medication. So we look at that. Iron deficiency is another really big one. We know that iron deficiency early on, we can't have catch-up growth from that. What I mean by that is if we have a child who hasn't had enough calcium, and then we start to give them more later on, whether it be in the form of food or supplement, we can see some catch-up growth in terms of bone length and density. But with iron and its impact on brain development and the ability to pay attention and retain information, we want to make sure that we regularly are giving children enough iron. And that can be really hard to get through diet, especially in a more picky or selective eater. So finding a really good iron supplement is sometimes important as well. And it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Some children need certain supplements and some don't. Magnesium, zinc. There's so many nutrients that we need to look at and say, what is the diet needing? And could we be supplementing that with either more of the nutrient-rich foods or an actual, multivitamin supplement before turning to medication. Mm-hmm. We also find that physical activity and sleep make a huge difference. And of course, that's a triad that's all connected, right? Nutrition, it impacts sleep, and sleep impacts nutrition. Physical activity makes a difference in how a child will be able to get to sleep at night. We want to see them getting fresh air and body movement. We know that more screen time can lead to concerns as well in terms of all three of those. So there's a real connection that we love to chat with parents about at Nourished Beginnings, just to help them understand that it's not just one thing. It's really a grouping of overall health. And when we set our children up for success with nutrition through food and sometimes supplements if needed, helping them get into a good sleep and activity routine, we can see massive changes in their ability to concentrate at school, in their ability to handle their emotions, even in their ability to articulate. So one of the phrases that we'll encourage parents to use is one that's used in leader effectiveness training in the corporate world is, help me understand. Help me understand how you're feeling right now. Help me understand, what happened when you made this choice. And when a child feels heard, again, they're more likely to chat with us about it. And then we can say, okay, you know what I'm hearing from you is you were actually feeling really hungry. So let's understand how we can, communicate so we can get some food into you before you get to that place. Yeah.
I was sharing with Noelle before we started recording. My son had some extra energy in middle grade and had some issues, and we dealt with it nutritionally. And I remember having a conversation with him and a nutritionist, and we're talking about the fact that, breakfast, it was usually the cereal, the pancakes with the syrup on it and whatnot. And I said to the nutritionist, would it be better if he had a meatball for breakfast, that protein? And she's like, actually, yeah. And my son's like, I can eat a meatball for breakfast? I'm like, yeah, dude, no problem. And, oh, boy, talk about life-changing moments.
Yes, and when you mention the maple syrup, we don't want to demonize foods, right? We want to allow for, all foods fit. But we do know, especially for children that are very sensitive to food and their behavior, that very simple sugar foods and foods with food dye do tend to impact them. And so even though we can't have hard and fast research to say, oh, sugar affects behavior, we absolutely know that for some kids it does. Mm-hmm. And so for those kids, especially as they get older, helping them understand, if you're offered a Freezy, yeah, you could have it, but your brain may not feel great after, right? Whether it be the food dye in there, the simple sugar. So what could we send with you when you're going to kind of a social gathering? What could you have on hand? How can you be ready so you feel part of things, right? Especially birthday parties. How can you feel part of things, but not necessarily have that impact of not feeling well afterwards? And that's an interesting part of the journey. And for families who do have children with ADHD that are on medication, we know that there's sometimes a lower food intake during the day and a massive hunger later in the day. So setting those children up for success at school with something like a bento box, lunchbox can be very helpful. And they open it and everything's there in front of them and they can have little bits. We're not asking for that second step of opening up several different containers or making a lot of choices. So depending on where families are at can make an impact in terms of what strategies are going to work best.
Yeah. It just makes so much sense, to listen to our bodies.
Yes.
But it's something that even adults do. I mean, I know adults who will go to sleep with a bottle of antacid beside the bed because they know they're going to have heartburn. And it's like, why don't you just change your diet? You know what it is you're eating that's making you upset, and you won't have to have that bottle of antacids, and you just feel much better.
Yes, it's true. Well, we all have these endorphins, right? They go off in our brain, these feel-good hormones associated with different things. And for some people, that is very strong for certain foods. So even if they know that later on there could be a consequence in how they feel, that in the moment excitement of, the endorphin release that comes along with the flavor of the food can sometimes be helpful. And so one of my roles as a dietitian, if I'm working with adults in that situation, is to help them find foods that can, be enjoyed. Obviously, we're meant to enjoy our foods, but also not necessarily lead to those consequences later on. But it can be very difficult to truly listen to our bodies and to truly make choices based on the potential of how we might feel.
Yeah. So tell us a couple of recipes that we might find in Superfoods for Super Kids.
Oh, sure. So let me think. We have a really cool muffin in there that has spinach in it. And I would encourage parents to call it whatever they want or ask their kids what they want to call it, whether it be Hulk muffins, or, T-Rex muffins, whatever it is. But giving it a fun name is, obviously the fun that parents and kids will see in the book. But I would say kids could always give a more creative recipe name than I could even come up with. So, that is great. We've got some smoothie recipes in there, smoothies and smoothie bowls, which is a really cool way to get more vegetables in. So whether it be cauliflower rice or kale or spinach. One that's really fun in there is date boats. Super easy. You just take a date, pull the pit out, and then fill it with almond butter or peanut butter or just an actual almond. If we have older children, we'll be careful about choking hazards with smaller children. A beautiful set of nutrients in dates, quick energy available there with the added almond butter or peanut butter, a little bit of protein in there. Peanut butter and banana sushi is always fun. So you have a wrap, put peanut butter or almond butter in and some hemp hearts, put a banana in there and roll it up, and then chop it up. And it becomes a really delicious breakfast or snack. So lots of, as you can see with these examples I'm giving, there's lots of ones that are very easy and realistic for kids to, do on their own. And then we have ones that are a little more complex, especially for older kids or for younger kids to make with their parents. We've got a chili in there, some beautiful salads, egg salad boats where you make egg salad and then put it into a little pepper. There's tuna melts, there's breakfast pizza. The list goes on and on. So lots of ways for kids to be exposed to new foods and to enjoy foods that they already know that is part of their repertoire.
Yeah. I love that idea of encouraging your kids to give foods their own name.
It's fun.
Here in our home, one of the things that my grandmother taught me to make was this kind of a pasta kind of thing. She called it goulash. Lots of folks here in the States call it American chop suey. Both of those names turn my kids off. They wouldn't even think of eating it. So we said, it's mac and sauce, and they devour it. Once we gave it that name.
Absolutely. They go for it. When my boys were younger, they loved chicken pot pie. So they had a grandparent who made the most delicious chicken pot pie. And I remember the first time that I gave them fish, I didn't want to just call it chicken, right? We want to call food the name that it is. So I knew I wanted to tell them it was fish, but I also wanted to bring a familiarity to it. So we called it fish pot pie. And today, when we have fish, my kids call it fish pot pie. It's really just fish.
But it makes perfect sense because, the human mind is this really amazing and complex thing. And, if we can understand our kids and play little tricks on them and little psychological tricks that aren't hurting them, but that will actually help them, it's a win-win for everybody, I think.
Absolutely. Another beautiful thing about getting kids in the kitchen too, that especially applies to having kids home in the summer or if they are doing any remote learning, is we can teach things beyond the food, right? We can teach math. So there are times that you could say, oh, this recipe calls for a cup of oats, but our full measuring cup, it's dirty right now. I only have a quarter cup. How many quarter cups am I going to need to get that full cup of oats in there? And maybe they know the answer, but if they don't, it's a teaching moment. Well, let's count, right? There are things we can learn about liquids versus solids. We can teach patience, right? Oh, we have to put the muffins into the oven for 18 minutes now. We'll turn the timer on. What do you think we can do in 18 minutes? Let's see how many puzzles we can do. So we create the opportunity to think about how can I fill the time to get to the thing I'm looking forward to. And that's something that then children can take into other aspects of life. So there's just so many teachable moments in cooking and getting kids into the kitchen.
One of the first times I tried to cook on my own, with my cousin, at the time we picked up one of those cake box mixes, and it said it needs 3/4 of a cup of water, but I read the 3/4 as 3 or 4 cups of water.
That's awesome.
So it was a very moist cake. I love that.
Oh, I'm going to remember that story.
Yes, my aunt did too when she came home. But she was very understanding. I was the mess we made. But she appreciated the fact that we were trying. And then she explained to us that was 3/4 and not 3 or 4. I really love that you've created superfoods for super kids. I think a lot of parents out there, I'm probably someone who fell into this, we're afraid to ask questions. We kind of think we're supposed to know it all. Like everybody else knows everything. And I'm a parent. I should be able to do this stuff. But, this is your passion. This is something that you focus on. You're an expert at this, about getting kids involved with food in really useful and beneficial ways. So why not, pick up the superfoods for super kids and tap into Noelle's expertise? And same with all different aspects of your parenting life. You don't have to do this on your own. There are experts out there that are willing to share their knowledge with you.
Yes, I mean, really, kids don't come with a manual, right? And, if you have a television being delivered, you may not know how to completely hook it up, so you have an electrician come. Mm-hmm. If your toilet is leaking, you have a plumber come. If your child is sick, you go to a physician. And so as a dietitian, I have such a passion to walk with parents through this journey, because like I said, they don't come with a manual. And it's one thing to know what nutrition is in different foods, but the behavior around it and the language that we can use with kids around food, that's a whole nother ballgame. And so it's a passion that I have. And I would love to raise this next generation to have less fear around food. I've worked with eating disorder population throughout my career as well. And there can be a lot of misconceptions. There can be a lot of fears. And a lot of parents today grew up through the low fat, low carb kind of, craze stages. And wouldn't it be awesome to have kids who see food as fun, see, a well-balanced diet as a good thing, that hunger isn't the enemy, right? It's okay. We don't need to eat in order to never be hungry. We can eat and expect to be hungry again in a few hours. And it's great to take a break from our work and the things we're doing to sit down and nourish our bodies and then move on, right?
Yeah.
And it takes starting that language and that perspective from an early age. And I hope I can be, a small part of that movement.
Yeah. It's so important. And I think we're going to invite you back on a future date to talk about those eating disorders and how we, maybe getting our teens cooking in the kitchen with us would be a good way to help them develop healthy eating habits.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, please tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about Superfoods for Super Kids. I know you have a couple of great blogs.
Thank you. Yes. So I have 2 different places on Instagram. So one is at Motherhood and Meals, and that's just all one word connected. And then the other is at nourished.beginnings.kids. And so those are the 2 main places you can find me. In terms of websites, there's motherhoodandmeals.com and there's nourishedbeginnings.ca. And I would welcome any direct messages on Instagram, emails, through websites. I love connecting with parents. So I would encourage anyone to please reach out to me. It is me you will talk to. It is not an admin assistant or anything like that. It's 100% me, and what you see is what you get. I'm super authentic, super real, and just love my community of parents.
Well, I definitely want to encourage folks to check out your blogs and your website. I know I went on Motherhood and Meals, and the first recipe I found was this apple Christmas tree. It's beautiful, and it is so simple.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm all about making it realistic. I can remember going on to find ideas of things to do with my kids, right? And I would go into Pinterest and it would be like, I can't do all that. I don't have all those things on hand, or I don't have time for that, or I'm going to be too stressed. So I really like to make it straightforward and simple. Yeah, with that Christmas tree, you just cut up an apple, you lay them out in the shape of a tree, put some pomegranate seeds on, a bit of coconut to add some snow. And then the trunk can be a favorite, biscuit, cookie, cut up muffin, or a bit of nut butter as dip. Super easy to make, and kids love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I said, it's really beautiful. Boy, you bring that out at a kid's party or even at an adult party, people are going to go, oh my goodness, you're like a gourmet cook.
And they would rather reach for the apples, right, in that than a cookie. Like we taste first with our eyes.
Absolutely.
To make it look pretty. Even with, kind of our pickier selective eaters, perhaps we have one that's not really into having very much fruit. So if we take a pancake or a piece of toast and we put 2 banana slices on with half blueberry in each one as eyes, we put a little strawberry nose and maybe take some raspberries to make a smile. Even if the child doesn't want to eat any of those, they're going to look at it and think, that's pretty, that's cool, this is fun. And they'll touch them to remove them. Even if they don't eat them, they're touching them to remove them. That's an exposure. Yeah. And eventually we get to a place where they pick them up and they pop them in their mouth. Right? So we taste first with our eyes, and we were maybe told as kids, don't play with your food. I am the opposite. I'm like, kiddos, let's play, let's have some fun, right? Because the more they're touching it, the more they're seeing it, that green bean as a fun stem of a flower or base of a tree or part of a stick man, and then they gobble it up because they touched it, because they were able to become familiar with it.
Awesome. Well, we've had a great time speaking with the author of Superfoods for Super Kids, Noelle Martin. Hey, Noelle, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a true pleasure to be here.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Kathleen Pelly. She'll be here to celebrate 5 little angels. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Noelle Martin. Please be sure to check out Superfoods for Super Kids. And be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, readingwithyourkids.com. Noelle is going to be a regular guest on the show. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading and cooking with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.